Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about Studio in the Cloud. My name is Zach Owens, and I'm a cloud solution architect here at Microsoft, working with media and entertainment customers. I'm joined by a couple of special guests, Mike DeSilver, who's a CTO for our Northeast region at Microsoft. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how you doing, Zach?
Good. And Harry Greenling, who's the CEO of Support Partners. Support Partners works really closely with us across the industry. How's it going, Harry?
Yeah, it's good. Hi, Zach.
Yeah, good. So, Mike, could you kick us off? Given the broad set of customers that you work with across all industries, what are you seeing across the industry when it comes to people adopting Studio in the cloud and production in the cloud technology?
Sure. For the past couple of years, it's been a lot of customers, mostly TV, movie production, broadcast, publishing. They're thinking about moving a lot of the capabilities to the cloud, right? But originally, it was mostly, digital asset management, media management solutions. Sometimes we would turn to some enhanced metadata with AI. But lately, we've seen a lot more customers start leveraging compute in the cloud for video rendering, because those are elastic by nature. So
Yeah.
you can use what you need. You can turn off when you're done. Really, the true essence of what cloud is really was originally built for, right? But more recently, COVID-19 sped up a lot of the get to the cloud as soon as possible digital transformations that we're seeing, right? Those transformations, just from experience, take months to years, and we had to do that in weeks. Uh, we couldn't have done it without some great partners. This is a good segue to Harry, but like I, I don't know if it would have been possible without them. It's just an extreme amount of I would say urgency, to say the least, because what are you going to do if you don't have production in the cloud with the ability to people to work from home and actually get to that? So I'd love to kick it over to Harry if he's got some time. He can tell us a little bit about what support partners did for us and their customers during that time.
No,
Awesome.
sure. Thanks, Mike.
And Harry, if you could give us a background on support partners for everyone, I think that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. So Support Plan's been going for about 16 years. We're a cloud-first company. So basically, we design, deliver, and support solutions which sit within the cloud, specifically on the Azure platform. And we build collaboration tools and workflows that basically support that. We're located in 3 different countries, so in the UK, Europe, and also over here in the US, where I'm based. And we work with some big companies to do with advertising, broadcast, and sports as well. So that's really where we come from and our background. Um, I think what we're seeing, which is really interesting to your point, Mike, is this massive acceleration of being able to get to the cloud, and this has definitely been produced by by COVID-19, and by the fact that we have all these users who are sitting at home and they want to be able to consume, use, edit, and deliver content still. And I think that's a really key piece. Certainly, we're seeing collaboration is very, very important, and using things like Microsoft Teams to be able to talk to each other, to be able to show edits, to be able to view content and find content is really important. So access to archive, which traditionally has been very on-premise, now is really important that that's sitting in the cloud, so I can have global access to that. And also being able to have access to cloud edit tools as well. Using technology such as Teradata or WVD, and make those really frictionless and easy to use for the users. So it doesn't matter where I'm located, what kind of internet connection I have at home, because that's one of the big challenges that people have seen. VPN, which is a very traditional way of attaching to a corporate environment, just doesn't cut it within the M&E space. So being able to use things like Windows virtual desktops and, to your point, dynamically scale and contract depending on how many users and have access to that media, really, really important. And then I think the last thing that definitely seeing is a much more requirement on security. So, moving content, especially if you're a studio or you're an ad agency or whatever, and giving that to people at home on drives, there's inherent risks with that. So definitely being able to have access through something like WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop, to the environment where I don't have to move that content locally, not only increases the speed and velocity of delivery, but also the security of that content as well. I think all those things are really key in the current space.
Awesome. And we're going to be diving deep technically into the architecture of these solutions and the technology that enables this. But Mike, could you give us sort of overview of what you're seeing from a technological perspective that's enabling this transformation?
Yeah, what's so great is it's kind of there's three parts to this, and Harry fills a part, we fill a part, and there's another part as well, right? Where Microsoft stands, where we have 58 regions across the world. We're the backbone of all of this, right? The infrastructure behind it, the networking behind it, and moving those assets to the cloud takes a lot of bandwidth, to say the least. And it's actually a problem that we I wouldn't say we've totally solved, but we're really close. So we're really helping a lot of customers move that data a lot, like where Harry was talking about raw files, right? They're huge, massive files. To get those over, we're with partners like Teradici, but also the third part of that is partners like Avid and Adobe, where they put their solutions over top of like our GPU farm virtual machines. It just changes everything, right? You have partners on the ISV side, you have partners on the systems integrator side, like support partners, and then you have Microsoft running the backbone. It's amazing how we're able to kind of grab all three of those, and it's not 1+1+1=3. It's actually a lot more than that. And then when you talk about collaborating across all of that, right? We have Teams, Office 365, all members of the production studio, our partners, Microsoft, can all be and coexist in one specific environment where they can collaborate. We can streamline workflows. We're staying connected while people are working from home. All of those things are all built into this ecosystem that we've created in a very, very short period of time, where everybody wins. Our ISVs win because they, Avid, Adobe, Teradici, they're looking at getting more studios on board. Harry and support partners wins by getting customers moved even faster, which is why we would go to a great partner like him as well. And then you get Microsoft, where we're seeing the benefits of just helping our customers just do more. It's pretty awesome, but it doesn't come without challenges, right? And objections. And I'm probably not the one to ask about this, so I'm going to ask Harry, like, what are some of the objections that you're seeing from customers on moving, their studios to the cloud?
Sure. I think it's a good question, that. I think there are two real main objections that are worth talking about. The first one is the user experience. Creatives are can be challenging to work with, and understandably, they're looking for, they're looking for a good experience. They want a desk-type experience in the cloud. And if you think about the technology that is behind the scenes to provide that from the cloud, that's just immense. But the user, in essence, the creative that's sitting there, is not interested in that technology piece, and nor should they be. What they really want is that whole spacebar experience where I can hit the spacebar and it'll start playing immediately. I can hit the spacebar and it'll stop playing on that frame, and that's really, really important. And definitely with, the WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop, and also the Teradici product, which is giving us really high resolution and high fidelity of that color space, we are definitely seeing, if it's designed properly and delivered properly, that kind of performance, to the extent where it's actually quite difficult for the editor to understand where they're editing from. And I do that with my team internally. I actually ask my application engineers, who are all editors, tell me which machine you're working on, and they find that quite challenging sometimes. Nice. So that's kind of my test that we do. The second one is really around cost control. People have this feeling with the cloud that I'm just spinning up all these resources and I can't manage them and it's going to get out of control. And that's not the case at all. There are lots of processes in place. There are lots of dashboards you can use. And there are lots of tools, workflow tools, that you can deploy in the back end, which actually enable you to minimize the costs that you're using and really use the systems and the cloud in the best way to support your business. And I think that's really interesting. I think if we are able to understand that and understand how the business works and what the objective of the business in, we can match that to the cost profiles and really make it sure that each of the business units know what they're consuming, so there's no surprises at the end of the month, but also, more importantly, know what the value of what they're consuming is as well, and how they can work with that. So I think there's some really good options there. There's a third one that I want to add, and it really picks up on your point, actually, Mike, which is around silos. So we know that in the creative market space that we have silos between the creative space and the business space. And those silos create inefficiencies. We see that all the time. And one of the unique things that we see that the Azure platform with the Power Platform and the Office 365 sitting on top of it is that we can really tear those silos down. We can give creatives access to operational information which helps them to do their job better. We can give, more importantly, the operation access to creative information which allows them to do their job better. And not only that, but using tools that they're used to using. Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Teams. So there's no real ramp on training. You don't have the same problem with a MAM or with a custom production system or a PAM. These are all tools that people are used to using and they have on their desktop already. So the speed of delivery, as opposed to deploying a specialist system, is really, really important here, especially within this COVID-19 environment. So that's been a massive, massive benefit for us and the users globally around our users globally.
Awesome. So, Mike, thanks for joining us to kick this off. Harry and I are going to follow up and go deeper into some architectures and the technical solutions behind this, but we really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Harry, thank you for being an amazing partner. Zach, thanks for putting this together. It's been my pleasure. And this year's coming up is going to be pretty amazing. I can't wait.
Agreed.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
All right, Harry. So we know that the most important thing for successful adoption of this technology is that creatives have an environment they can do amazing work in. What's the experience like for them?
Excellent. Thanks, Zach, for that. So let's have a look and see exactly what we're dealing with as far as the Azure Studio and the cloud is concerned. And I'll go through each of these in turn. So if we have a look here, we've got two regions, one which is in East US, one that's in West US. And these regions have some resources in them. In this case, they're virtual edit machines. And we also have some AD as well. Up here in the East US, we have some other media services and cognitive services around it. And a VIR, which is going to help us with rendering and basically 3D visualizations. In the middle of here in central US, we have some blob storage where we've got our main media store. And that's basically talking to two Azure file pieces of storage which are sitting within region. Then we've got some home office users here who are connecting using Windows Virtual Desktop. We also have some East Coast offices here, which again are connecting via Windows Virtual Desktop. We have the corporate HQ, where the video SAN is, where we're basically moving data backwards and forwards between the corporate HQ and the cloud. And then we have some West Coast offices here who are basically connecting over Windows Virtual Desktop as well. Connecting all of these together is a piece of Azure VNet peering, and that VNet peering is basically allowing each of the regions to be able to communicate together. What I'm going to concentrate in this section on is basically the GPUs and the Azure file piece. And we're going to have a look and see what that experience looks like for those people who are sitting in the home office and the East Coast office and the West Coast offices. So I'm just going to flick very quickly over here to one of my machines, which is basically sitting up in the cloud. And here we are in a Windows Virtual Desktop, which is hosted in one of those regions. And you can see here that I've got Premiere basically playing, and the experience I'm getting is very similar to the experience I would be getting if I'd be using that Premiere on-premise. If I open up the File Explorer here, you'll be able to see that I've got a number of different files here, and I've got a piece of media drive here, which has basically got my assets which are on it. So here's some assets which are basically files. These are MP4 files that we've got. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to drag and drop as though I would normally into this Premiere. It will import the files in. I can double click and I can play those back as I would normally. I can mark an in point and an out point of that. I can basically push that up there and I can drop that into this sequence that I've got open here. And I can basically scrub up and down. I can play backwards and forwards using JLK, and I can stop. I can use L to go forward, double time, 10 times. I can use the space bar. I can stop on the space bar as well. And we're basically getting the same performance that we would get if that was local. So when I hit the space bar, it's going to stop on that frame, which is really important from a creative point of view. You can see here that I've got another couple of clips which are here that I've been basically working with. I can again scrub up and down the timeline here. I could mark an in and out point if I wanted to, and I can play that back. This is actually showing the new Microsoft Duo product here.
And Harry, I think the cool thing is we've seen sometimes when we sit down creatives at these cloud-based workstations or on, even in a studio where they are sitting locally, sometimes they get confused as to which is which because the performance is so similar between the two.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a test that I do on my team. So I have a whole lot of application editors who basically test this stuff for big corporates and big enterprise environments. And I'll sit them in front of a machine. One of them's running WVD with Premiere on it. One's running Premiere locally. And I ask them to tell me which one is which. And they can find that quite difficult sometimes depending on where they're located. So absolutely. I mean, the performance that we're seeing here and the type of functionality we're seeing is very similar to an on-prem infrastructure.
Awesome.
So the other thing I just wanted to show you was actually what this machine was made up of, just so you can see how things are working. So this is actually an NV4 machine. So it's actually running an AMD processor GPU on here. And I've got basically 8 processors which are working here. I've got 28 gigs of memory, and I've got, as I said, a Radeon AMD. And those are all working together to basically deliver the performance I'm looking at. This is just one example of a machine that we can have within the Azure environment. There are other GPU-backed machines which are really cool for being able to do creative work on with Adobe Premiere. So NV6 with 6 processors, all the way up to NV24 with 24 processors and full NVIDIA GPUs. And they can be, depending on the type of work you're doing, the type of frame rate you're looking for, and type of resolution you're looking for, they can be very, very powerful.
That's a cool thing is that you get the ability to switch between these different size machines given the actual needs of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can spin those and spin them down really quickly as well. So no longer do I have to wait, for a machine to come free. I can basically just go and say, look, make this machine an NV24 machine, and it will just spin it up and it'll give me 24 cores. It'll give me 128 gigs of RAM, and it'll give me a full GPU there, which I'm able to use. And when I finish with it, I just spin it down and basically I'm not paying for it any longer. It's very, very cool. It's very flexible.
Awesome.
Okay, so just going back and having a look at this, the file share that we've got here. If I go to this one, you can see that I've got this media drive, and you can see I've got these files in here. Now, this media drive here works in exactly the same way as an SMB share would work. There's no difference at all. So I'm able to obviously push through it. I'm able to basically have a look at the files that are on there. I can right click, I can rename, I can do anything that I want to do to these files. So there's no difference from an on-premise infrastructure to an infrastructure that's in the cloud. And that's really, really important as well. So for the editors that are using this, there's no real change management that's needed. There's no real change in training or how to use a product at all. It's very, very similar to the way that they work at the moment.
Okay, that's awesome, Harry. So let's talk some more about the networking and connectivity requirements to make these solutions work.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So one of the key things that we need to have is a really low latency, because obviously latency is not so great when you're doing editing, because when you hit that space bar, it's going to stop a couple of frames on if your latency is not quick enough. So basically, in order to do that, what we need to do is basically have a really fast connection to each of the regions. So you can see in this diagram here that I've got a home office and the East Coast office, and these are connecting over the internet, but they're going directly into the East US region. And the reason
when we say really fast, how fast are we talking about?
Well, it's not so much about the speed of the connection that's actually important. So you're basically looking at, for a 1080 screen around that, you're looking around about 20 megabits per second. Mm-hmm. If you've got 2, you're looking around about 40 megabits per second. So it's not so bad. It's really the latency that gets you. So what you want to be able to make sure is that you're connecting to that local region. So in this case, what we don't want to be doing is going from the East Coast and connecting into the West Coast US, because that latency is going to be too much. So making sure that we're basically connecting into the same region that we're basically working from. And that's a really massive, that'll give you a massive improvement when you're doing your editing and the performance that your editors are going to get.
And when we're talking about like home office users, especially now that so many people are working remotely, consumer grade internet connections can often suffice, correct?
That's right, absolutely. And we've got a couple of our clients who are quite happily working over normal ADSL or normal home connections. And again, as long as their latencies are reasonably small and they've got a reasonably good bandwidth up and down, then they're having a pretty good experience. That doesn't seem to be too much of a problem.
Yep. We've seen a lot of our customers have global teams working in production and post-production. So the Azure regional footprint globally really helps with that as well. So we can have those GPU, VMs, and storage deployed close to where those users are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and one of the other things that really helps here as well, if you look at my diagram, is this express route. So express route, for those people who don't know, is basically a bit like taking a cable and plugging it from your data center, your Azure data center, into your corporate HQ. And it's a direct connection that goes through. We're not transversing the internet. We're not going through any kind of routers or hubs in the normal internet to do that. So the latency is really low, and you can get some amazing speeds now. So I think we can get up to 100 gig connection on express route from you to the Azure data center. And you can see here in the diagram, we've got two routes, one going to central US and one west US.
And then what about the East US? So some of the components, so say you have your Azure, your AD on-prem at your core HQ, and here you're showing the express route connecting between, central US and west US, but how do we get connectivity to the East US for those central sort of core services?
Absolutely. And that's where really VNet peering comes in. So what VNet peering allows me to do is it allows me to basically connect the East US, the Central US, and the West US as though they were all on one big virtual network. And that allows us to send data between those across the Azure backbone. And it makes it really flexible when we're trying to move lots of amounts of data multi-regions.
Nice. And the vWAN, what role is that playing in this?
Yeah, so vWANs are really interesting. It's pretty new from Azure. It's been around for about 6 months. But what Azure vWAN allows us to do is basically pick a region, so in this case, West US, and we have a hub within that region, and then we can go out to a local POP. So let's say you've got quite a lot of offices which are around the West Coast, San Francisco, you may have some up in San Jose, you may have some down in
Santa Cruz, where I'm sitting.
Santa Cruz, yes, where you are. So in Santa Cruz. And each one of those areas will have a local POP, so a local kind of on-ramp, and you're going directly onto that on-ramp and straight into the Azure network, rather than going, for example, up to somewhere like San Francisco and then on. So if you're in Santa Cruz, you want to make sure you've got the quickest route into the Azure network, and that's what Azure vWAN does for you. It basically allows you to hop onto that local POP and get onto the network really quickly and really easily.
Nice. And I mean, one of the cool things about once you're actually, connected to your Azure data center is then you're on the Azure backbone, which is connected right into the heart of the internet. So maybe we could take a look at a demo.
Sure. So let me just go over to basically back to our Premiere system here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up Edge, and I'm going to basically show you the kind of speeds that you can get. Now, bear in mind, one of the big challenges that working with media is that basically copying media backs and forwards and getting media from other places. And if we're sitting at home, you've got to rely on the speed of your internet link. What we can do here is we can basically run a test, and you can basically see that the speeds are going to get far in excess of what you're going to get sitting at home. So I'm going to get...
Or most studios, for that matter.
Exactly, almost studios, right. So I'm going to get around about 1.5 gig, I think, somewhere around about that download. That's not so special, but watch my upload. I mean, that's going to be like 1.8, 1.9 gig.
Awesome.
I mean, that is amazing. And it really means that if you're getting media from from an archive or from an external source, you're going to get that media super quick instead of having to download and upload that locally. So that's a really good advantage here, and certainly something that Azure's an Azure editing system or an Azure editor who's sitting on the other end would take great advantage of.
All right, Harry, so this is super cool. We've touched on storage a number of times during the conversation, but we haven't dug deep into it yet. So let's do that now.
Yeah, excellent. So let me just pull out all the storage pieces on this slide here, and then we can talk about them individually. So the first thing I want to talk about is the blob storage, which in this case is sitting in central US. So blob storage basically is where we're going to keep all our media assets that we basically want to access, but we don't want to access them in real time. We don't want to put that on Azure files, and we'll come to Azure files in a moment. Within blob storage, we have 3 tiers. We have the hot tier, we have the cool tier, and we have the archive tier. And each one of those tiers has a separate function around them, and basically a separate cost as well.
Yeah, and there's different sort of performance characteristics of that, and there's a way that you need to manage the life cycle of assets that are sitting in those different tiers. And I think we'll get onto this later, but I think that's a really interesting element of how you build a real studio in the cloud solution.
Absolutely, and also how you make it cost effective, because to keep everything in Azure files can be really expensive with the amount of media that we're talking about that we use within editing, etc. So having a process to be able to move those files efficiently backwards and forwards across those blob storage and across those lifecycle rules is really, really important, especially when you start to look at a central piece of storage here. So the next piece of storage I want to talk about is the Azure Files. Now, Azure Files is a serverless SMB share that sits within Azure. And in this case, we have it sitting in 2 regions. We have East US and West US. And the real reason we have 2 Azure file shares is because they need to be close to the instances of the edits. And those
GPU VMs, that are kind of faded out right now.
That's right, absolutely. So if I just flick across, we're going to bring up, no, that's not going to work. Okay, we'll go from that point, yeah? So the Azure files, yeah? So you're absolutely right. So those GPU VMs are faded out at the moment, but basically it needs to be really close to there so we can get high-speed connectivity. And Azure Files comes in 2 separate types. You have standard file share and you have a premium file share. A standard file share is slower, but pretty good for using like 50 megabit per second content, if you're doing XDCAM or things like that. And also you can have up to 100 terabyte file share as well. Premium file shares much, much faster, really, really fast performance. Again, you can have up to 100 terabyte premium file share, which is accessible. And that's really where you're going to put your high speed formats. So your ProRes HQ, your 4K material, and that type of material is going to go into a premium file share.
Cool. And how do we get assets to and from the sort of traditional on-prem in the studio SANs that we're also used to working with fiber connected to your sort of creative workstations there?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. So as you can see here, we have a video SAN which is sitting in corporate HQ, and we have an express route. And that express route is going straight into central US. And in this case, what we're doing is we're basically using a product like Databox Gateway or Databox Hub to basically sync the material which is sitting on video SAN straight into blob storage. And that could actually go into blob storage, or it could go directly onto the Azure file share and do that. So that's one way of basically being able to upload that content and being able to sync that into the environment. And there's a couple of other ways we can do it as well. We can use a product like Azure Stack HCI, and we can use a Azure file share to be able to do that. Azure File Sync. Azure File Sync allows us to have an on-premise file share and the Azure files which sit in the cloud, and they can basically be synced together, and they'll be operating and basically syncing all the time. So you can have exactly the same performance. You can have exactly the same material sitting up in the Azure file share as you would have sitting on your in your home office or on your East Coast or West Coast office in this case.
Cool. And sometimes you see even like third-party sort of file transfer acceleration technologies like Signia and Media Shuttle and those sort of things in these architectures as well.
Absolutely, and that's really normal. So being able to deliver directly into Azure Blob at a high speed, Signia has a really good product called Signia Files that can do that, and that basically is going to deliver at high speed. I can get up to 10 gigs directly into that Blob storage, and do that over UDP. So it's high. So it's basically going to look at the latency and try and see if it can deal with that. So you're not going to see a drop in latency, or indeed, you can put a Signient machine VM next to the Azure files, and you can sync to that as well, and that will give you high-speed synchronization using Signient.
Cool. And so let's talk about Azure and the role Azure plays in some of these solutions, especially in things like render workloads and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we tend, as we said before, what we tend to have a lot of media that's sitting on blob storage, because that's the most cost-effective way to put that media. So what we need to have in order to have high-speed rendering or high-speed batch processing or even cognitive services on there is this basically high-performance cache. And that high-performance cache in this case is Azure. And what we're basically doing is we're taking the blob storage and we're basically looking at the blob storage through an SMB or NFS share. And we're able to put that and make that available to the services that are sitting within those cognitive services and batch services, such as 3D rendering. And it's basically enabling that fast transfer of data between the blob storage to the Azure as a cache, and then basically using the batch process to batch process those frames, writing them back to Azure, and Azure is then writing them back to blob storage for them to be picked up and used in the edit.
Yeah, I love it. So why don't we switch over and look at a demo of how you can manage the life cycle and the movement of files across this, because that's what's really difficult is when you have storage in multiple locations, you have life cycle options for how it's going to be stored in blob. Is how do you actually facilitate people working with files in that environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we'll do is we'll just flick back to our Premiere Edit system and my Windows Virtual Desktop here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Teams. Now, we have a product that basically sits in Teams that allows us to have a look at that storage and the blob storage and basically get content from various different places on that blob storage. And we're using natural language processing to do that. So if I basically type something, or I'm going to copy something into Teams here, I'm going to say, show me assets with service from March. And what we've got is we've got some really clever tech that is sitting under the hood here in the Azure space, which basically is saying, okay, I know that you want some things from March. I know it's to do with Surface. In this case, it's obviously a Microsoft service, and I need to see assets. So you can see here that it's basically picked up that we've got these assets which are sitting there. In fact, we've got more assets if we went and basically asked to do that.
And I think it's important to note some of the technology behind this specific experience in this bot, we didn't depict in the architectural diagrams before, just for simplicity's sake. One of my colleagues, James Tools and John de Havilland, are creating a webinar as part of the series around the use of AI and ML in studio technologies, and that really gets more deep on how we use our computer vision technologies within cognitive services and things like that to actually extract some of that metadata of what's in these assets and project that into search repositories, and how you can actually get this intelligence out. And you kind of touched on it. There's natural language processing and the bot framework behind the interactive experience that the users have here. So it's really cool stuff, and it's an important part of bringing something like this to life.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a whole lot of Azure technology that's sitting underneath this, from cognitive services to Cosmos databases to indexing tools to basically custom models that are sitting within Teams. It's an awful lot of tech that's sitting here to do this. But what we're doing is taking that tech and making it really easy for the average user to be able to use.
Yep.
If I click on here and I basically say, okay, I want to look and see what these are. Now, of course, what I don't want to be able to do, what I can't do with Azure Blob is I can't go, okay, show me that content. Actually, is that the content that I want? And that's really important, because the moment I start to go and get content from Azure Blob, unless it's in the hot tier, I'm basically costing it's giving me an egress cost. So I want to make sure that it's actually the content that I want. So what we've done here is we created previews that we can look at. And I can actually play those previews and I can see, okay, is this the content that I actually want? And is it content that I actually want to be able to bring back? So you can see in this case, I'm using this great Surface Geo product again, and it is the content that I want. I know this is what I want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to tick this box. But before I do that, one of the key things here is I can actually see what that looks like within my blob storage. So blob storage is object-based storage, and there's no real file system in there. So I can't mount it on my desktop, my Windows desktop. I can't look to see what it is. So what we've done here is we've basically extrapolated that and made that into something that we can look at. So I can actually see, okay, isn't that in the right place? Yeah, so my 2020 assets, there's my agency brand pitch, there's my exports. So I know this is the project that I want, and this is what I need.
And when you select these assets in certain sort of folder structures, you might have all of the additional high-res source material that would go along with this to do sort of an adaptation or use this for the next project, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So because typically I know my folder structure, I can just go, actually, you know what? That Surface Geo had that really good soundtrack that I want to use somewhere else. For a mood reel, I want to use that in an idea that I've got. Actually, all I want is that soundtrack. So I could just have a look here and I could look at the project folder and pull that soundtrack out and just download that. And that's really important.
Cool.
So once I found this information here, what I can basically do is I can say I want to download it. So what I can do is click on the download, and you can see I've got 3 separate locations here. So I've got my download to OneDrive, which is my local, obviously, OneDrive, which is on my system. But I've also got these 2 other locations, which is WIP London and WIP LA. And these are on-premise. So I'm not just downloading to my cloud solution here, my Windows Virtual Desktop, but I could also go off and find content from my other editors if I wanted to, and basically download that content to their local remote storage as well. So that's really powerful for us to be able to pull that out.
And in a scenario like this, you may have someone like a producer who's familiar with the assets and wants a specific set of assets to be sort of adapted or worked on by, say, a production team or post-production team in another location, so they can sort of hydrate that storage, whether it's a local SAN or whether it's a, Azure files in that other geo, to kind of pre-position it and get it ready for work by the other teams, right?
Absolutely. And it's really important because the other thing that we're doing here is we're pulling metadata out as well. So in fact, you can see I've got some detailed project information here, but that's not actually coming from any system which is in Azure. We're pulling that from a line of business system. So in this case, it's a WIP-based management system that we're pulling this from. So that when you're trying to find content, you're trying to move content, you know who's worked on the project, you know what the project number is, and you can basically be assured that the content that you're moving is the right content, and you're moving to the right place. Now, another thing you can see here is the storage tier on this particular asset here is actually marked as cool. So it's not sitting in my hot storage tier. Yeah. Now, if that was sitting in an archive, then I would actually have to go. I'd have to tell the system to rehydrate it. I would then have to wait for it to rehydrate. I would then have to keep checking back to see if that's the case. What we've done here is we've written some clever smarts that sit underneath this that basically will go and do all of that for you. And it will actually tell you when it's happened. So if I'm going to go here, I'm going to say download to my file. I'm going to say download to OneDrive. You'll see here that it's basically telling me what's going on. It's telling me that it's going off to go and find that file now.
And what's interesting here is it's not technically downloading to the local OneDrive that you have installed on your actual workstation. It's actually putting that file in your OneDrive in the cloud, which will then sync to wherever you have that sync relationship set up on whichever workstations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so I'm not pulling it local at all. This is all within the cloud. So what this is actually doing is it's going off, it's finding that piece of storage, and it's then asking me, okay, is that the file that you want? And I'm going to ask permission to do that. Yeah. And if I've got permission to be able to actually download that file, then it's going to basically download it. And you can see it's downloaded that already. So it said downloaded to OneDrive, and now it says it's there. Okay. So if I go to my OneDrive on my machine here, you can see I've got this applications folder. If I double click on it, you can see there it is, introducing the Surface Duo. So I can then take that, drag that to my editing drive, drag that onto my editing drive, and you will basically see there it is being copied over. So when I go there it is, available there, and I can then take that, I can drop that into my edit, and I can start editing with it. And I can drag and drop that onto my timeline, and I can start working with it straight away. Really, really cool. So giving us global access to assets, I can federate across multiple storage environments. I don't just have to look at one single piece of blob storage. I can look at multiple blob storages all globally. And I'm able to pull that. I'm able to search for it. I'm able to do that with natural language processing, which is really cool. I'm able to download that to my cloud machine. I'm able to pull that into an edit, super quick, super fast, carry on editing.
Yep. And we didn't look at it in the demo, but you can do cool stuff like mention your colleagues in that context of the conversation within Teams, make sure that you're on the same page with what assets you're looking to collaborate on, and really provides a really cool integrated experience for a lot of the different personalities and personas working on a particular project.
Absolutely. And the key thing is we work in a really visual environment. We're used to looking at clips. We're used to finding content. And I can see that content before I start to commit to pulling that back, because sometimes that can take time, and also it can be quite expensive. So I want to be able to make sure it's the right clip that I'm pulling back. So that whole visual cue that we can see, where we can actually view the content before we actually pull it back, I think is really, really important here. And I can do that within Teams.
Agreed. So Harry, we know that a lot of people are concerned about the security implications of having so many remote workers. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, perfect. So let's go back to our main slide here, and I can basically pull out the security here. So as you can see, we've got a corporate HQ. That's basically where our Active Directory and our main source of truth is. We've got an express route, which, as we talked about before, is a secure encrypted direct link between corporate HQ and the data center that we're working in. In West US, we have an AD federation here. So we're taking information from Active Directory in the corporate HQ and federating that up to the West US region. And then we're sharing that between the Central US and the East US. So all the GPUs,
and that's with that VNet peering, which is what allows that to happen. Yep.
That's right, with the VNet peering. So what that basically allows us to do is to have exactly the same experience that we'd have on premise when we log into a machine as we would have in the cloud. So I'm basically able to log into a machine using my AD creds. I've got MFA if that's enabled, and I'm basically got the same security and ability to comply with my policies as I would on premise.
And although we don't have them highlighted in the slide here, what's the implication of the users that are working over a regular internet connection from home or from the different regional offices?
Yeah, it's a great question. So actually, it's exactly the same experience for those internet users. So when I log on, I'm still going to get my AD credentials. I'm still going to have to use MFA, and I'm still going to have the same policies applied to me, whether I'm sitting in the corporate HQ or whether I'm sitting remotely as well.
Cool.
So what we also have here is the FS logics as well with the Azure files. And what FS logics is doing is basically allowing me to offload my profile to Azure files. So each time I log in, it's going to go and get that profile from Azure files. It's going to apply policies, it's going to apply the GPO, it's going to apply all those things around here. And then every time I log out, it's going to do exactly the same thing. It's going to basically put that back onto Azure files so that I know that whichever machine I'm logging in and out of, whether it's part of a pool, or whether it's a personal machine that I have that's allocated to me, I'm going to have exactly the same feeling and exactly the same environment to work in.
Awesome. So why don't we take a look at some of these security features in Azure?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's flick across to that and basically see what that looks like. So here's the security center, which is basically in Azure. And what this is showing me, and this is our demo subscription here, is that I've got some point scores, which is around the policy and compliance. I've got some recommendations here around my resource health, and you can see that I've basically got a couple of things which are issues. And I can basically tap on those, and I can go into what the issues are, and I can basically have a look and see where I am. So I've got some recommendations here, which is install monitoring agents, the health issues should be resolved. I've got an internet-facing machines should be protected with network security groups. So if I click on that more, you can see the description of the issue that I've got. I can see the machines which actually have been affected by that. And I can also see, what I should be doing to basically fix that issue as well. So
the integration with being able to
to
fix
do that.
Exactly. And the integration with the compliance policies as well is pretty powerful. So those will surface here. So if we maybe go over to the Trust Center and look at some of the available compliance policies, that could be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see, this is the Microsoft Trust Center. It looks at all the services across all of the Microsoft estate, but I'm going to focus specifically on the Azure ones here. And I'm basically going to have a look and see what we've got that's available to us. So here's the Motion Picture Association of America, which is one of the policies that we have, which is very relevant to our environment and our industry. So you can see that here in 2016, that basically Azure became the first hyperscale multi-tenant cloud service to complete the formal assessment. So that gives us some confidence that basically the security around specifically doing broadcast and motion picture is being complied to. And we can see whether that's been complied to actually within our area as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And if we flick back, I think a page from here, it'll show that over sort of 90 compliance.
Yeah, so here we go. We can see all the global, we can see the US government ones, the regional country specific ones, and then the industry specific. And that's the one that we picked here, which is the MPAA.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the powerful features of the Trust Center as well is that you can get direct access to the audit reports for all of these across our different cloud platforms. So if, for example, you're responding to your own audit, an RFP, an RFI, whatever it may be, you can leverage the material that we've created in your business as well. So good stuff. So as we talked about in the beginning of kicking off this webinar, Harry, we discussed costs as a concern. So why don't we look at some of the ways that you can mitigate those concerns, plan for them, and track them while the service is running?
Absolutely. So one of the great things that we have in Azure is this thing called the pricing calculator. And the pricing calculator enables us to look to see what the possible price of services that we're using within Azure is going to be before we actually commit to them. So I've got all these products which I can basically pick. I can search for products here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick one that we basically need to use, which is the Azure vWAN. So if I hit vWAN, I can basically go and add it to this, and then I can basically look to see what that's going to cost me. And I can change the way in which that basically is made up. So I can look at scale units, which are actually in 50 megabit per second, actually 500 megabit per second, 500 megabit per second units. And I can also say how many connections I'm going to have. And I can just change those up and down as the requirement is actually required.
Yep. So, and each service has its own set of toggles and controls for how you can predict your costs. And you can build them into a whole estimate, right? So if we...
That's right. I can change regions here depending on which region I want, but I can, as you say, also build them into a whole estimate. And here's one that we did earlier on, which basically shows an environment which is basically made up of all the different pieces that we possibly might need to be able to do a virtual edit in the cloud.
Nice. And once we have the services running, why don't we look at some of the cost management capabilities directly in Azure?
Cool. So if I go into my subscription here and I look at the subscription, I've got these great tools here which enable me to look and see what the cost is that I've actually spent so far. I can look and see what my forecast is, but also for those people who are worried about us hitting a budget or whatever, I can actually create a new budget here and set alerts up on a specific amount of time or a specific amount of cost. So I just put the budget amount in. In this case, I'm going to put 400 in. I'm basically going to say, okay, let's say I hit that. Who do I want to send that to? I want to send that to me. And then basically I can basically create that and send that out. So that makes it really, really easy for us to basically say, okay, I'm going to basically put together these alerts, which can be on the percentage of the budget that's been used. And I can say 80% or 90%, I'm going to do certain things. I'm going to email, I'm going to send I'm going to basically create an action or do that kind of things. So that's basically how we can make sure that we're keeping control of our costs and keeping control as we go through.
Cool. Been awesome, Harry. Really appreciate your time. Why don't we talk some more about how support partners can help our customers actually get to market more quickly with these solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've enabled is basically some frameworks, which we call accelerators, which are based around some of the concepts that we talked about. And what that means is that we've already done some of the work underneath the hood within Azure to set up services and profiles and also systems. So all we really need to do is just layer the customer's requirement over the top of that, and it just gets them to where they need to be a lot faster.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff. We've worked with you on a number of these with some of our customers in the media entertainment space, and we've seen sort of the power of bringing these to get to market much more quickly and try POCs and really make progress on pilots. So it's really good stuff.
Yeah, just means that we can get to where we need to be a lot quicker.
Nice. And here we've provided some links on how to get started. So we have our content production page on our media industry portal. So a bunch of really cool content that links from there. We have a blog article written by one of our engineering leaders that points at some of these solutions and is a great place to sort of orient yourself, and a number of links from solution partners. So to the solution accelerators that we just discussed, as well as a good white paper on how to do this sort of connected and modern production. So with that, Harry, it's been awesome. We really appreciate it and look forward to doing some more of this.
No, Zach, that was great. Thanks so much for your help, and thanks for working through this with me.
All right. See ya.